Welcome today to Father Paul's talk. Today we have a reading from St. Luke's Gospel, chapter 24. So let's listen to these words and then I'll say a few things about the reading for our help and encouragement this week. On that same day, the first day of the week, two of the apostles were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all the things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. Jesus said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Caiaphas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place in these days?" Jesus asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who had said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then Jesus said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all the prophets had declared. For was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then be entered into his glory?" Then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted them the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he was going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour, they got up and returned to Jerusalem. And they found the 11 there, their companions, gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been known to them in the breaking of the bread. Amen. Most of the story tells about a journey that begins in great sadness, a long journey, in fact, a journey from Jerusalem to Emmaus. But it's also a story about a journey that, as it were, is short. That's how it feels at the end of the gospel. The two disciples get up and they go to Jerusalem. It's like the journey from Jerusalem is long and sad, confusing. And then the journey back, it seems to go instantly. And there's full of joy. The story is about the revelation of Jesus, God. How it is that God had died upon the cross, is now risen and meets with his disciples, his friends, on this road. And the story of the disciples is our story as well. In that, there are times when we walk with each other, we walk with Jesus, where our road seems long and hard, and there's confusion and sadness. That's how it is. And there are other times when we walk with each other and we walk with Jesus. There's a lightness of step. There's a joy, and the journey seems simple and straightforward. There are times in that journey when our hearts are heavy, low, as it says in Luke, sad. And there are other times when our hearts are burning, full of joy, as the disciples. Or we can say this, the story of the disciples, there are moments in the story when they feel very apart from God, maybe even apart from each other. And then there's other moments they feel very close. Their story is our story. This story, as I've mentioned, speaks most of all about the revelation of who Jesus is, God, who died, rose from the dead. And we can look at this in so many ways. But today, I want us to try and look at this in a very human and personal way, and see what we can learn from that. And we can do that by asking the question in a very simple way. Why did Jesus meet with his friends, his disciples, on the road to Emmaus? Why was it, how was it, that Jesus revealed himself to the disciples when he sat down at table with them in their house in that village, having a meal? Maybe we can say this. It's not simply the fact that Jesus wanted to, as it were, witness to them about his own resurrection. It wasn't that he simply wanted to affirm what the disciples had already began to experience, as it says in the scripture in the morning when they went to the tomb. Maybe Jesus wanted to express his joy in the resurrection. Or perhaps even more importantly, he wanted to share that joy with his friends, the joy of his resurrection. He didn't want to keep it to himself. And maybe it's also true that Jesus didn't want their hearts to continue in this deep sadness and sorrow. Rather, he wanted to relieve them of that sorrow because he loved them, because he cared for them. Jesus is the one who is full of joy in the resurrection and wants to share the resurrection and to ease the troubles of their life. As I say, the story of the disciples in this reading is the story of us as well as his disciples. Now let's turn now to the real center of the story in many ways, where there they are in the house. Jesus is meant to go on, but somehow they called him back. And they're sitting at the table, simple table perhaps. And then maybe they asked Jesus to give the blessing of the bread. And they break the bread. And then the story tells us, suddenly then they realize who it was. And then the story says, he vanished. Maybe the writer of the gospel, Luke, when he emphasizes this breaking of the bread, is also like pointing to the breaking of the bread the last time Jesus did that, which was the night before he died when he broke bread with his disciples. And now he breaks the bread again as the resurrected one in their midst. More importantly, perhaps we can say this. When Jesus breaks the bread, he's breaking the bread of the heart. In other words, this sitting together in round a meal, his disciples, there is a real sharing that's going on. a sharing of thoughts and feelings. It's the sharing of the heart. Breaking the bread of the heart. And this is important for us. The fact that Jesus reveals himself in a meal, in the breaking of the bread, in an intimate sharing. This breaking of the bread, of the heart, as we can talk about it, is about how we share with each other and how we share with Jesus, God, our dreams, our hopes, our fears. How we listen and how we talk with each other, with Jesus, about these things. The things that matter. The sort of things that only get said amongst friends, often over a meal. And it is this breaking of the bread of the heart, this sharing, that enables the disciples at that moment to see who Jesus is. It is this breaking of the bread of the heart together, which I think is far more important than what we believe, or even for that matter, going to church. In other words, what is the most important is this fellowship with each other, this breaking of the bread of the heart with each other and with Jesus. And for Anglicans, the Eucharist that we have in church points to the importance of this breaking of the bread of the heart with each other, the sharing of our hearts, what's important, what matters, our fears, our hopes and dreams with each other and with Jesus. And in that moment, it's about Jesus, as it were, breaking the bread of his heart, sharing what's important to him, how God sees things, and for us to allow God to share with us, Jesus, in this way. Perhaps that's most important of all. St. Paul talks about, in one of his letters to the Corinthians, he talks about there are three things that are really important and three things that will last: faith, hope, and love. Hope is about the belief, the confidence that things can change for the better. Faith is about trust. Faith is about what we believe. And love, I want to suggest to you today, when Paul says about faith, hope, and love, and how love is the greatest of all things, is that love is this breaking to bread together, the bread of our hearts, sharing the bread of our hearts, sharing our hearts with each other, and allowing Jesus to share his heart with us. This is what love is. And you notice again in that letter that I mentioned how St. Paul talks about that what are we if we have no love? We can have many things. We can have faith, he says, doesn't he? He says, I can have faith to move all mountains. But if I have no love, what am I? In other words, if we do not have this sitting down with Jesus, this meal with Jesus, this meal with each other, sharing the bread of our hearts, then what value is our faith? What value is our worship? Love is the thing that's most important. It's the love that is eternal. And that love, in the context of what I'm saying today, is this breaking the bread of our hearts together. And it is this sitting down with Jesus, this sitting down with each other, sharing our deepest thoughts and feelings and fears and what's important, our hopes for ourselves, for our families, for our world. It's that, in that breaking of the bread of the heart, that we experience Jesus within our hearts more than anything. And it's that, then, that gives us the strength to continue to go forward, to walk forward in times of difficulty, and gives us spring in our step in those times of joy. A bit like the disciples. I spoke earlier about how the disciples, went back to Jerusalem quickly. But in a deeper way, maybe we should be saying this. It's not that the disciples went back to Jerusalem. They went forward. They didn't go back, they went forward. In other words, going to Jerusalem wasn't going back to the way things were. It was going forward. It was a going forward, having experienced the sitting down with the meal with Jesus through the breaking of the bread of the heart that took them forward back to Jerusalem. And so, in our lives, in these difficult times we're living in, maybe we should be thinking like that. It's not about a case of going back to how things were, but going forward into something more. And at the heart of that something more will be this way in which Jesus is made known to us in our hearts through the way we break bread with each other and break bread with him, sharing our hearts, the bread of the heart. So, to conclude today, we can talk about this sharing, this breaking of bread in all kinds of ways. We can talk about it being fellowship. We can talk about it being community. We can talk about it as being family. We can talk about it as being soulmates in all kinds of ways. What I mean by this breaking of the bread of the heart together. But I think you know what I'm saying. So let me conclude this by saying, let me encourage you today and in the days to come to really make time to sit down with Jesus, sit down with each other, share bread that's made of flour and yeast as you will, but more importantly, share the bread, break the bread of your heart, sharing the things that are important with each other and with Jesus. Maybe you might hear the echo of some of Jesus' words in your ears as you do that, when he says, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. The word of God, the breaking of the bread of the heart. And it is that breaking the bread of the heart, which is what love is. All worship, going to church, all faith, beliefs, values, all these things come out of this breaking the bread of the heart together. In themselves, they are of little value. It is for this reason that Jesus spent so much time with the disciples, breaking bread with them. That's why he so often went into people's houses and broke bread with them. It wasn't simply just breaking physical bread. He broke the bread of his own heart and shared it with them. This breaking of the bread of the heart is about relationship, companionship, what it is to be known, loved, and understood, and being gracious enough to allow Jesus to break his bread with you, listening to his stories, listening to his hopes and his dreams. This will carry us through if we do this in these times of difficulty and then in the times of joy. A great church is a church that breaks the bread of the heart together. And may God break his bread with you. May God watch over you as you break your bread with him and with each other. And may his presence fill you with confidence, strength, and hope as you continue to journey with him and with each other. Bless you.